So Thomas, what is the greatest challenge in pulling all of the disparate video resources that you have at your disposal together? You mentioned 11,000 cameras that are now part of Operation Shield and that you bring into the center there, but the city, I think you said, owns less than 10% of that. So what's your big challenge in trying to get all that pulled together?
Yeah, absolutely correct. So the biggest challenge is really, I would say, almost patch management, in the sense of being that we have the PSIM, the Physical Security Information Management software, and it's emulating various clients. If a private partner on the other end updates their system and it's not something that matches the driver base that we happen to have, that can cause a breakdown in the connectivity between us and them. So that's one of the biggest challenges, making sure that we stay abreast of what's happening and making sure that the individual stakeholders that are sharing to us know that the consequence of doing that without letting us know. So that would be the biggest challenge.
And what was your, speaking of the Super Bowl, what was the greatest surveillance, challenge during the event and the days leading up to it?
Days leading up, I would say some of the wireless environment. That certainly proved to be challenging. We would like to have more fiber optics in the area, but considering that the downtown space of Atlanta uses a lot more concrete and does not actually necessarily allow for aerial fiber, it makes a bigger challenge where it will be cost restrictive and time restrictive to be able to burrow under the ground, get the correct permitting needed for that, and have that done successfully. So we used a large amount of wireless technology. Wireless works well, but again, we had to account for congestion in an area, RF congestion. It actually did pose a little bit of a challenge for certain portions of it, but we were able to get GC&E to come out and rectify that before any of the major event parts took place.
And I know you were asked a little bit about analytics, at least in terms of facial recognition, object detection. Are you using any analytic technology as a part of Operation Shield? Are you looking for any type of capabilities in that respect in the future?
So currently, we use license plate readers. That's of course a form of analytics. You're taking license plate data and matching it against a known hot list of whatever it is we're looking for, whether it's a stolen vehicle or wanted person. So that is actually a form of analytics. In the past, we actually had used predictive policing. It was actually a product called Predpol. We used that to determine where to go ahead and position officers for a potential of a certain crime type. We used that for a short period of time, determined that it was useful, but when we actually stopped the use of that product, we continued to have a crime drop because the officers already understood where they need to be, when the mindset had already been developed. So those particular analytics, or the Predpol, is not used. License plate readers are used. We are looking towards being able to possibly explore social media in the future, or other things that may actually be helpful to us. During the presentation, I mentioned that we're not using an object left behind detection, but that doesn't mean we won't use it. It's just currently where our cameras are deployed doesn't make a lot of sense. When we get outside of the downtown space, there may be areas where that would actually be more beneficial.
And what kind of complexity did having all of the additional law enforcement agencies add to your operations during the Super Bowl, if any?
Well, it certainly did. Everyone was cooperative, and we operated or instituted what we call our Joint Operations Center, which is based out of our public safety headquarters, where the leaders and the different key personnel from the various different agencies all would be in the same room, essentially almost like a giant command room, and they can converse directly on issues rather than having to go through multiple layers of whatever request needed to whichever entity. So that was helpful, but that doesn't mean, of course, that everything was absolutely smooth. We had times where resources were desired and it weren't in a specific area, or you have a conflict and we've had to address. For example, one thing I didn't mention during the presentation is we had the various different federal helicopters that were airborne during the time period up to the Super Bowl and the Super Bowl itself. Well, they all wanted to transmit their video, and APD wants to see it. and we needed to know that beforehand, so it would have been easier to get it into the network. So I worked continuously during the Super Bowl, before and during the Super Bowl, and got that in. But the request only came in during the Super Bowl time period.
Was there any talk or consideration for having things like drones, tethered drones, or anything like that to increase your capabilities?
Not with APD. We have considered drones in the past. Right now, drones are still looked at as more of a militaristic type of approach, being used on civilians or citizens. So at the moment, the department is not looking at that. The Atlanta Police Foundation actually, in the past, had to try to do a study to determine if it would be useful and what the mindset was of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point in time, we are not using it. So there was no talk of doing it. I believe there was one of the agencies that were near the CNN Center during the time of the Super Bowl that were using essentially a tethered drone, which doesn't violate any FAA rules because it's physically tethered to a cable. So that became useful for them. But APD itself, no, we have not used any drones, and we're currently not looking at it.